Before we start, hit subscribe and drop comment if you love these stories. All right, today's one is absolutely crazy. Let's dive in.
My wife left for a medical procedure. 17 days later, she walked into our house healthier than when she left. No incision, no pain, just a perfect tan and a missing wedding watch she never takes off. I work in insurance fraud. I know a scam when I see one. So, I asked her one question. Not about cheating, not about the charges I found, just this. Do you even know what Marcus is sick with? She froze, turned white, and sprinted out of the house to urgent care because she realized she never bothered to ask the man she spent 2 weeks with what he might have exposed her to. That one question unraveled her lies, her career, her health, her affair, and our entire marriage. And all I did was let the truth do the heavy lifting. Chapter 1. The softball collision that started a life. The first time I met Sophie, she almost killed me with a line drive. It was 2016, early summer, the kind of day where the sun feels personal. I wasn't supposed to be at the company softball game. I didn't even work for the company. I was just there as moral support for my buddy Ryan, who believed he was the reincarnation of Babe Ruth, despite hitting like a man swinging underwater. I was minding my own business in the bleachers, nursing a warm bottle of grocery store water, when Sophie stepped up to the plate for Hartwell Financial. I remember thinking she looked too put together for a team-building event. Everybody else was wearing free t-shirts. She was wearing eyeliner sharp enough to commit a felony. Ryan shouted something encouraging, probably for himself, not her. And then she swung. The crack of the bat sounded like a warning shot. The ball screamed toward me, whistling past my right temple close enough that I felt the wind peel a layer of dignity off my face. I didn't move, didn't duck, just blinked slowly, the way people do when they're trying to understand how death got their address wrong. Someone yelled, "Heads up." A little late, when I finally exhaled, Sophie was already jogging over with a horrified expression and the kind of athletic grace that suggested she'd never pulled a muscle in her entire life. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she said, stopping inches from my knees. "I'll know when the ringing stops," I answered. She shoved a cold soda into my hand. Some generic lemon-lime thing that tasted like melted ice cubes. But she looked guilty enough that I drank it anyway. That was Sophie. Direct, polished, apologetic in a way that made it feel like she was managing the crisis rather than regretting it. A natural executive, even in a dusty field behind a business park. We talked for 10 minutes, then 20. Then the game ended and Ryan came over sweaty and proud of his 3 ground outs. Sophie lingered beside us like she wasn't entirely done apologizing. Or maybe she wasn't done doing whatever it was that she did, assessing, calculating, deciding. She smiled at me before leaving. Not a flirty smile, a decisive one. 11 months later, we were married. People like to say it was fast. Maybe it was, but it felt inevitable at the time, like gravity or taxes. Something you don't fight unless you enjoy paperwork. Our first years together were ordinary in the way people brag about on social media. Modest apartment, shared grocery lists, a plan to get a dog once life gets less chaotic. Which, for the record, it never did. Sophie climbed the ladder at Hartwell with the grace of someone who'd memorized the building's floor plan long before she started working there. I worked in insurance fraud investigations, which impressed no one at dinner parties. Sophie's family adored her ambition. They treated me like the supporting actor who should be grateful for the screen time. Her mother over Thanksgiving dinner once said, "You two balance each other. Sophie brings drive and Derek brings stability. Stability is what people call you when they can't think of anything better." My father pulled me aside afterward. "Son, that girl's got ambition," he said. "Don't let her run over you." He said it kindly, the way some men warn their sons about riptides. But Sophie and I worked, or seemed to. We shared a decade of quiet routines. She color-coded the calendar. I maintained the gutters. She worked. I fixed the car. She negotiated raises. I negotiated with mold behind the dishwasher. We celebrated anniversaries with reasonable dinners and took one genuinely great trip to Hawaii, where she spent half the time answering work emails in a bathing suit. Still, our marriage had its own rhythm. Predictable, comfortable, possibly a little too quiet under the surface if I'm being honest. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. 13 years of love, loyalty, and carefully color-coded calendars because nothing screams romance like shared Google reminders. If there were cracks forming, they were hairline and invisible. Back then, I thought the world was solid. I didn't know yet how fast it could break. Chapter 2. The medical leave that didn't limp. Sophie returned on a Thursday morning, exactly 17 days after she'd left for what she called her out-of-town outpatient procedure. That was the phrase she used when she explained the whole thing to me. Hartwell's insurance works with a specialist in Richmond. It's routine, Derek. I'll probably just sleep most of the time after. No point in you taking time off. She said it with the calm authority of someone reading directly from a medical brochure. And because I had spent 13 years believing she operated on a level of competence just above everyone else, I didn't question it. People travel for specialists all the time. A minor cyst wasn't worth rearranging my work schedule for, and she insisted the whole process was no big deal. Her flight out was early. I drove her to the airport. She kissed me goodbye like she was heading into a dentist appointment. Mild inconvenience, nothing more. And then she disappeared for 2 weeks. I tried calling a couple of times during the first few days, but she always answered with that tired voice she used when she wanted sympathy without questions. I'm fine, just resting. The doctor said minimal movement. I'm in and out of naps. She didn't FaceTime, said she looked terrible. I didn't push. I don't like seeing myself on camera either. So, when her car finally pulled into the driveway 2 weeks later, I expected someone who looked like she'd undergone at least something. Instead, she got out of the Mercedes like she was arriving at a charity gala. Her heels clicked briskly across the concrete. Her posture said promoted executive, not recovering patient, and her face, bright, polished, energetic, looked exactly like the brochures for Hartwell's corporate retreats. Not like someone who'd spent the last 17 days resting. I was under the Mustang, elbow deep in oil. When I heard the car, I slid out just in time to see her drop the sunglasses down her nose and smile. Hey, I'm home, she called too cheerfully. Sophie never used that tone unless she was trying to distract from something. Usually the credit card bill. Welcome back, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. How'd the procedure go? Easy, totally fine, she said, waving her arm around to illustrate. Fine. She waved with the freedom of someone who definitely had not been told to avoid lifting or strain. Then I saw it. A pale rectangle on her left wrist. The exact shape of the Rolex watch she wore every day for the last 13 years. Except now no watch, no reason, and a tan line bold as a confession. She told me the procedure happened on her right side, so why would she remove a watch from her left? I didn't ask. Fraud investigations have taught me that the fastest way to kill a lie is to let it talk. She brushed her hair back, both arms up, smooth, painless, and said, God, it feels good to be home. Amazing recovery. Really, medical journals should study her. Maybe she regenerated like a lizard. We walked inside. Or rather, she glided in that energetic, glossy way she reserved for networking events and Christmas parties, where she wanted to be photographed. Her phone buzzed as she set her bag on the counter. She glanced at it, then locked the screen too quickly. Everything okay? I asked. Just my sister. A second later, the shared tablet on the counter lit up. A synced notification from her sister. Hope your surgery wasn't too painful. Let me know if you need anything. Sophie froze. Not dramatically. She was too practiced for that. Just a half second too long before she smiled again. She had lied to her own sister. Good to know I was in good company. I poured myself coffee, letting the silence settle. Sophie hated silence. It forced honesty into the air. You look great, I said. Surprisingly great. She gave a laugh that was a little too bright. Well, you know me, fast healer, apparently. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. So I said, did the specialist say anything about follow-ups? Her head tilted slightly. A tiny hesitation. The usual. Rest, hydrate, no heavy lifting. Which arm did they operate on again? What? The cyst removal. You mentioned it was deep. Which arm was it? She blinked once, twice, like her brain was flipping through index cards labeled lies. Pick one. Left, she said finally. Left, I repeated. She folded her arms, both of them, across her chest. I'm really exhausted, she said. I'm going to shower. Then she walked upstairs with the agility of someone starring in a fitness commercial. I waited until I heard the water running before checking the shared tablet. There it was, a pharmacy notification from 3 days earlier. Your prescription is ready for pickup. Sophie Morrison. Interesting. She hadn't mentioned prescriptions or follow-ups or anything resembling a medical event. I tapped the insurance portal next. 2 weeks of statements appeared. No specialist visit in Richmond. No outpatient procedure claim, just an annual exam. 17 days away, recovering from absolutely nothing. And in that quiet kitchen, watching a notification fade from the screen, something in me clicked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, unmistakable click of a puzzle piece sliding into place. Sophie thought she'd build a perfect story. Unfortunately for her, she'd married someone who knew exactly what perfect stories were made of. Paperwork, receipts, and holes big enough to drive a Mercedes through. Chapter 3. Receipts don't lie, but spouses might. I waited until Sophie's shower turned into the familiar high-pressure roar that always made the bathroom sound like a jet warming up. That was my cue. If she followed her usual ritual, she'd be exfoliating, conditioning, and giving herself a pep talk in the mirror for at least 25 minutes. More if she was lying about something. I wiped my hands clean of oil and sat down at the kitchen counter in front of the shared tablet. The one we used for grocery lists, bill reminders, and the occasional recipe she never made. It had been mostly my device over the years, except for the healthcare folder. Sophie guarded the healthcare folder like it contained nuclear codes. Let me handle it, she'd say whenever I tried to look at our insurance account. You just get overwhelmed. Trust me, I did trust her. Not because she earned it, but because paperwork is the one arena I'd never choose to die in. If she wanted the battlefield, she could have it. Except now, apparently, she'd built a whole fantasy war on it. The CVS notification I'd seen earlier was still sitting in the recent alerts. Your prescription is ready for pickup, Sophie wrote. A prescription she hadn't mentioned for a procedure she never had. I opened her insurance portal. Well, our insurance portal and navigated through the maze of tabs she always claimed were so tedious. It took me 30 seconds to find what she'd been hiding. Her last medical appointment, a routine annual exam, no outpatient procedure, no minor surgery, no recovery orders, nothing. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for something to appear that would make her story true. Nothing did. Fax rarely banned for convenience. The health savings account was next. Sophie always handled this part too. Said she was better with numbers. That was true, but mostly because she enjoyed making them disappear. I opened the transaction history. First, I thought the screen had glitched. $92,146. The Azure Retreat, Richmond, $23,871. Harborview and Field Seafood House, $122.60. Premier Uber Services, $310. Davidson and Company, Jewelers, and on. Luxury hotel, spa treatments, fine dining, private car rides, a boutique jewelry store that advertised custom engraving for discerning clientele. All coded as medical expenses, spa charges as medical expenses. Maybe the IRS has a section for therapeutic martinis. I clicked on the Azure Retreat out of morbid curiosity. Their website loaded instantly. Sleek white oceanfront photos. The kind of place couples go to reconnect, which usually means someone is apologizing for something expensive. Rooms overlooking the water, couples massage packages, rejuvenation suites. Nothing about minor cyst recovery. I leaned back in the chair and let the absurdity settle. Sophie hadn't just skipped a real procedure. She'd used a tax-advantaged medical account to fund a luxury vacation with someone who wasn't me. The receipts were a confession disguised as accounting. A text pinged on the tablet synced from her phone again. Sophie's sister following up, "Call me if you need anything. Don't overdo it." I almost laughed. Sophie hadn't overdone anything except lying. I kept scrolling through the charges. The pattern became unmistakable. She left on the 7th. The first Richmond charge appeared on the 8th. More followed every day for nearly 2 weeks. Restaurants, hotel upgrades, a spa treatment called the harmonizing experience, which sounded less like medicine and more like adultery in lotion form. 2 thoughts arrived quietly, one after the other. First, Sophie never had surgery. Second, Sophie had spent 17 days recovering from nothing. I rested my hand on the edge of the table, studying myself, not from shock, but from the strange calm that always came when a lie finally stopped fighting. Insurance fraud cases usually break down in predictable ways. Someone wants something. Someone thinks no one will look too closely. Someone assumes paperwork is a formality. But paperwork is a forensic trail, not a suggestion. Sophie had forgotten that. She once bragged that she never kept receipts because they clutter my purse. Now her entire life was cluttered with the digital version of them. The shower upstairs shut off. Her footsteps crossed the bedroom. A hair dryer started. I sat back and breathed. Not angry, not heartbroken, just aware. She thought she'd written a flawless script. But scripts fall apart when the props don't match the plot. I closed the tablet gently, like closing the lid on something long dead. Receipts don't lie, but spouses. Spouses get creative. Chapter 4. The coworker in every picture. I waited until Sophie fell asleep before opening the laptop. She always slept hard after returning from a trip. Jet lag, she'd say, even if she never changed time zones. Tonight was no different. Within minutes of her shower, she was out cold, curled on her side like a woman who had absolutely nothing weighing on her conscience. I sat at the kitchen table, the glow of the screen lighting up the dark room like some kind of interrogation lamp. The cursor blinked, patient and expectant. I typed Hartwell Financial Richmond Retreat into the search bar. And there they were, photo after photo, arranged neatly on Hartwell's official LinkedIn page, like a scrapbook made by someone who wanted to be sued. Sophie appeared in almost every shot, glowing, beaming, hair catching the ocean light like she was starring in an ad for untouchable confidence. She didn't look like a woman recovering from a medical procedure. She looked like a woman who'd found a new limb. And standing next to her in every picture attached by some invisible corporate magnetism was Marcus Chen. I knew Marcus, not personally, but in the way you know a man who stays late with your wife because the Patterson account is complicated. The kind of man who wears tailored shirts to casual Fridays and smiles like he's just remembered a secret he'll never share. In the first photo, Marcus had his hand hovering a respectful inch from the small of her back. In the second, the inch had vanished. In the third, if he'd been any closer, he would have legally qualified as a scarf. I clicked on each image, examining the details. The champagne glasses, the sunset, the strategically placed company banners that insisted this was a professional event and not what it obviously was, a taxpayer-subsidized romantic getaway. Sophie looked alive in these pictures in a way she rarely did at home. Bright, effortlessly in control, exactly herself except for the missing wedding ring in one shot. No tan line, just a bare finger catching the light too cleanly. Interesting. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. Her left wrist glinted with a delicate gold bracelet. Not her Rolex, not anything she owned before she left. I didn't need a receipt to know where that came from, though. Conveniently, I had one. I kept scrolling through the photos, each more revealing than the last. Not in the obvious way. Not kissing, not touching too intimately, but in the way two people looked at each other when they thought the world applauded their chemistry. A familiar voice echoed in my memory. Sophie's mother at Thanksgiving. You know who's delightful? Marcus, so charming. You could learn something from him. Derek. At the time, I thought she meant networking. Now I suspected she meant adultery. Another click. Another photo. Sophie and Marcus laughing. Her head tilted back, his body angled toward hers. People don't lean like that unless gravity is helping them lie. And then unexpectedly, another voice floated to the surface. One I hadn't thought about in months. Julia Chen. I'd met her at a fundraising gala the previous spring. The kind of event where people drink expensive wine and pretend to understand abstract art. She and I ended up talking near a silent auction table because neither of us cared about framed paint smears. Marcus was still married to her then, though divorce papers were in progress, which he apparently treated like a gray area rather than a legal status. Julia was tired that night. Tired in a way that hinted she'd been carrying the weight of someone else's irresponsibility for years. He has a disclosure issue, she had said in a low voice, as if sharing a warning label about health things, personal things, things partners deserve to know. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Her tone did the rest. At the time, I assumed it was related to insurance paperwork or some messy bureaucratic detail. People at Hartwell love paperwork drama the way some people love football. Now, looking at Sophie and Marcus pressed together under string lights on a Richmond pier, the phrase landed differently. Disclosure issue, not theoretical, not bureaucratic, personal. Sophie hadn't asked me a single question about Marcus's health in 9 months. She had, however, been glued to him for 15 uninterrupted days. A quiet click sounded in the kitchen as the refrigerator hummed back to life. The house felt too still, too intact, like it hadn't realized yet that a bomb had already gone off. The pictures kept loading, each one a new shard of glass. Sophie smiling, Marcus leaning. Champagne, beach wind, a wrist with a new bracelet, a ring finger conspicuously bare. My marriage had become a glossy corporate slideshow. I sat back in the chair, the screen's glow fading into the edges of my vision. There was no anger. Anger has heat, movement, purpose. What I felt was colder, quieter, like watching a slow, predictable collapse that had been scheduled months in advance. Receipts didn't lie. Pictures didn't lie. Patterns definitely didn't lie. Spouses, though, they got creative. Upstairs, the hair dryer finally clicked off. I closed the laptop gently, like tucking in a patient who didn't know they were terminal. Tomorrow, I would ask Sophie one important question, just one, and the truth would stop pretending it wasn't there. Chapter 5. A call to the woman who survived him first. By Tuesday morning, the pictures had settled into my mind like unwanted house guests. Loud, smug, tracking sand everywhere. Sophie was humming upstairs while getting ready, sounding for all the world like a woman who hadn't recently staged her own medical absence. The more she hummed, the clearer one thing became. I needed an external witness, someone who had lived in the blast radius before me. Ex-wives are the Yelp reviews of marriage. Harsh, brutally honest, and usually right. Julia Chen, Marcus's ex. We'd met once at a Hartwell charity event. It was one of those evenings where wealthy donors pretended minimal generosity made them humanitarians. She and I ended up next to each other near a silent auction table filled with luxury items nobody needed. A diamond-studded dog collar, a water call of a boat, a weekend getaway in the mountains, redeemable on dates that guaranteed mudslides. I remember Julia distinctly, not because she was dramatic, but because she wasn't. Her exhaustion was elegant, the kind that came from repeatedly lowering expectations until they hit bedrock. When she told me Marcus had a disclosure problem, I assumed she meant taxes or prenups or one of those miseries rich people invent for themselves. I didn't know then that I'd revisit that moment like a crime scene clue. I found her number still saved in my phone under Julia Gala. I hadn't used it since the night we briefly bonded over being the least interested people in a room full of peacocks. I stepped into the backyard away from Sophie's humming and called. It rang 3 times. On the 4th, Julia answered, voice flat but alert. Hello, Julia. It's Derek Morrison. A pause. The kind where a person evaluates whether answering was a mistake. Oh, she said. Hi. Everything okay? No, I said. I mean, yes, physically, but no in every other way. That sounds familiar, she replied. I exhaled. I'm calling because I have a weird question, and I want you to know up front I'm not looking for anything private or medical. She made a quiet sound, half laugh, half sigh. If you're calling about Marcus, you're probably already in the neighborhood of the truth. I leaned against the railing watching a squirrel dig in the garden like it was burying state secrets. I found out Sophie spent the last 2 weeks with him, I said. And before I do anything rash or stupid, I need to understand something you said months ago about a disclosure issue. Julia was silent for a moment. The kind of silence you can feel through the phone, not reluctant, just choosing the right words. I can't tell you medical details, she said. That's not my place. But I can tell you this. Marcus has a long history of not telling partners things they deserve to know, things that affect them directly. He avoids accountability. He avoids honesty. He avoids anything that might make him look bad. I listened, jaw tightening, not from anger, but from the slow realization that Sophie, in typical Sophie fashion, hadn't asked the necessary question before leaping into something reckless. So I said quietly, "This isn't something you catch by standing near him." "No," Julia said. "Not from proximity, but if you're involved with him or someone who is involved with him, you need full information and he doesn't give it. He never did with me." I rubbed the back of my neck. "And Sophie, she wouldn't know to ask." "That's what I figured," Julia said. "She looks like the type who assumes people are responsible because it's convenient to believe." It was eerie how accurate that was. Julia inhaled steady and tired. "Derek, I wish someone had warned me. You're smarter than I was. You're asking before the fallout hits." I appreciated the compliment, even if it felt unearned. My intelligence had simply come from paperwork, which was the least romantic source of wisdom available. "I'm not trying to diagnose anyone," I said. "I just needed to know whether she had enough information to make informed choices." "She didn't," Julia said immediately. "If she's anything like he was with me, she has no idea what she walked into." I closed my eyes briefly. The wind brushed against my face. Light indifferent. Nature never flinches at human stupidity. "Thank you," I said. She let out another soft sigh. "Derek, I'm sorry. Truly, Marcus has a way of making people think responsibility is optional, but it always catches up one way or another." We said goodbye. I hung up. For a moment, I stood there in the quiet backyard, watching morning sunlight stretch across the lawn. Sophie's humming stopped inside the house. A door closed softly. Julia hadn't told me anything specific. She didn't need to. All I wanted was context, and now I had it. Sophie had spent 2 weeks with a man who didn't even disclose necessary information to the women he lived with. And she hadn't bothered to ask. Not once. Julia's final words lingered in the air like smoke. "You're smarter than I was." Maybe. Or maybe I'd simply reached the point where the truth no longer surprised me. Either way, the next step was unavoidable. This wasn't about jealousy or revenge or indignation. It was about accountability. Before this blew open, and it would blow open, I needed Sophie to answer one simple question, and I already knew she couldn't. Chapter 6. One question that detonated everything. Sophie came downstairs the next morning dressed for work, which was interesting considering she'd supposedly been recovering from a surgical procedure less than 24 hours earlier. Recovery looked suspiciously similar to a woman who had spent 2 weeks tanning by the ocean with someone who wasn't her husband. Her heels clicked across the hardwood like small, confident lies. "Big day?" I asked, pouring coffee. She gave me a practiced smile over the rim of her makeup brush. "Meeting with the Patterson account first thing, probably running late." "Don't wait up." Her tone was breezy, like we were a couple in a commercial about how communication keeps marriages strong. I took a slow sip. "How's your arm this morning?" She froze for half a second. Not enough to be obvious unless you were trained to detect hesitation for a living. "It's fine," she said quickly. "Barely noticeable. The specialist did excellent work." "Mind showing me?" Her mascara wand stopped midair. "Showing you?" She repeated the incision. I said, "Just want to see how it's healing." She let out a short laugh. "Too sharp, too thin." "Oh my God, Derek. Seriously, you're being paranoid again. You always do this. Every time I tell you something personal, there it was. The classic pivot." Sophie had a talent for turning any question into an accusation against the person asking it. I sometimes wondered if she kept the script in her purse. "You said it was on your left arm." I reminded her. "Upper left." "It is," she snapped. "Okay," I said. "Show me." She stared at me, calculating. I could almost hear the mental gears grinding, searching for an escape hatch. She'd used this technique before over small things, receipts, schedules, credit card bills. "Derek, I'm not lifting my shirt at 7 o'clock in the morning like we're in some hospital drama. You're being ridiculous." "Strange," I said lightly because I thought recovery came with some kind of physical limitation. "You seem very mobile." Her mouth tightened. I set my mug down and leaned on the counter. "Sophie," I said calmly, "was there a surgery?" She went perfectly still. Not blinking, not breathing, just still, like guilt had frozen her from the inside out. Before she could answer, I added casually, "If you're unsure how to respond, I have something simpler." I watched the tension in her shoulders rise like a wave preparing to break. "What?" she said, voice thin. I looked her dead in the eye. "Do you know what health issue Marcus has?" Her reaction wasn't delayed. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even human. Her face drained so fast. It was like watching blood retreat from the scene of a crime. "What?" she whispered. "Marcus," I said again evenly. "You were with him for 2 weeks. Did he disclose anything you should know?" Silence. Then panic flickered behind her eyes. Raw, bright, unfiltered panic. She swallowed. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture I'd seen only when she was terrified. "I don't. Why would you ask that?" she stammered. "I figured it was something you'd know," I said. Given the proximity, her breathing changed. Shallow, quick, frantic. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I have to. I need to. I need to go." "Go where?" She didn't answer. She bolted for the door. Literally bolted like someone fired a starting gun. I didn't think asking about her coworker's immune system would send her sprinting like she was in the Olympics. But life had been full of surprises lately. The front door slammed. Tires screeched in the driveway. I watched her car peel away through the window. Within minutes, the house was silent again. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my coffee. It was still warm. The day had barely started. Yet the truth had already cracked open like an egg dropped from a roof. She hadn't run because of guilt. She hadn't run because of the affair. She hadn't even run because I caught her lying. She ran because that one question revealed the real problem. She hadn't asked Marcus anything. Not one thing. Not about safety. Not about risk. Not about what she might have walked into. And judging by the speed she'd left the house, the reality of that ignorance was sinking in like a stone tied to her ankle. I sipped my coffee, calm as a man reading the morning news. If Sophie wanted to spend 2 weeks in Richmond playing house with a man who treated disclosure like a chore, that was her choice. But running to urgent care the moment she was confronted, that was consequence. And as I learned long ago, consequences don't limp. They sprint. And Sophie spent 13 years believing she could outrun the truth. Chapter 7. Fraud departments were made for days like this. Sophie was gone for nearly 2 hours. Long enough for the house to settle into that strange stillness that only shows up after a truth detonates. Long enough for me to refill my coffee, start a load of laundry, and accept with mild resignation that the timeline of my marriage had officially become a liability chart. Her sudden sprint out the door didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly the shared tablet lit up with her panic. A text preview appeared on the lock screen. One of those synced notifications she insisted on setting up to keep us organized, not realizing it would one day serve as evidence. "Sophie to Marcus, we need to talk about your health situation." It was almost poetic. The woman hadn't asked a single question before spending 2 weeks with a man known for creative honesty. But the moment I asked one, she scrambled for answers with the urgency of someone realizing the lifeboats had already launched. Her phone must have practically melted because Marcus replied within minutes. "Marcus to Sophie, handle it yourself. Don't drag me into this." I stared at the screen, letting the words settle. Marcus didn't just ghost her. He casted her, silent, invisible, and completely useless. It was a remarkable text, really cold, dismissive, efficient in its cruelty. The kind of message that made it clear Sophie had risked everything for a man who wouldn't wait 4 seconds in a drive-through line for her, let alone answer a medical question that affected them both. I set the tablet down carefully, like it was a fragile artifact from a failed civilization. The next step wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Fraud has a smell, a texture, a weight. And the health account transactions I'd seen weren't just suspicious. They were a parade of neon signs spelling IRS audit me. So, I gathered the documentation, dates, charges, receipts, insurance statements, everything with both our names on it. Not her private accounts, just the ones legally shared. I wasn't going to hand her an argument in court by crossing lines she counted on me to forget existed. The fraud hotline picked up on the second ring. Benefits Compliance Department. How can I help you today? I need to report misuse of a health account. I said, join account. My name is on it. I can provide documentation. Can you describe the charges? Luxury hotel in Richmond, spa packages, restaurant expenses, jewelry, none of it medically necessary, all coded as health spending. There was a pause, then the fast rhythm of typing. And you have evidence. I have everything. Please submit it to our secure portal. We'll open a case immediately. I wasn't the villain here. I simply submitted documentation when the benefits department asked for it. The rest was automatic. Systems react to data, not emotions. Already compiling. It was almost soothing. The way bureaucracy moved when given clean data. Like watching a machine slip into a gear it had been waiting to use. After uploading the files, I contacted Hartwell HR. They couldn't discuss details, but the tone of the woman on the phone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first red flag they'd seen. Thank you for bringing this forward, she said. We will conduct a review. Translation. They already suspected something. My documentation just shortened their lunch break. Most companies don't manually review HSA claims unless something triggers the system, and Sophie's spending spree didn't flag anything until the totals grew suspicious. She was lucky until she wasn't. By noon, Sophie's Mercedes rolled into the driveway again, less confidently this time. The slam of the car door was sharper, like she wanted the house to feel her anger before she even walked in. She entered the kitchen with the posture of a woman who had just learned her imagination had consequences. They suspended me, she said, voice thin and ragged. Pending investigation. Same for Marcus. I nodded and stirred my coffee. They said someone submitted documentation. Someone reported misuse of the health account. Her eyes narrowed. Was that you? I didn't answer. Silence has a gravity that words can't match. You reported me? Her voice rose, cracking. You reported me to my company, my benefits, my entire career. You filled out the forms, I said. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. Her face twisted, anger mixing with desperation. I made a mistake, Derek. You made several. I corrected over a period of weeks with receipts. Her hands trembled. You're ruining my life. I took a sip of coffee, calm, measured. No, I just stopped helping you ruin mine. Sophie blinked, stunned. She had always been the one to declare the moral high ground in arguments. It must have been disorienting to find the ground had shifted under her feet. I can fix this, she whispered, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. You can talk to HR, I said. Explain why spa treatments and jewelry were necessary for your cyst recovery. She flinched. Clean hit. Her phone buzz. She looked down, hope flaring for a brief, painful second. Then the screen displayed a message. Hartwell HR formal interview scheduled for tomorrow morning. Legal representation recommended. The hope drained out of her face like water through a cracked bowl. She sank into a chair. This can't be happening. But it was consequences weren't emotional. They weren't personal. They were mechanical. She had built the machine. All I had done was stop standing in front of it. And watching Sophie realize that was the quietest vindication I'd ever felt. Chapter 8. Divorce Papers and Diagnostic Results. I filed for divorce 4 days after Sophie's suspension. Not out of anger, not out of heartbreak, out of logistics. There are moments when a marriage stops being a marriage and becomes a paperwork problem. This was one of them. It felt less like betrayal and more like discovering a faulty electrical wire. You don't waste time asking why it sparked. You just shut the power off before the house burns down. My attorney, Mr. Harrison, read through the documentation I'd compiled. Receipts, insurance statements, screenshots, timelines. His expression never changed except for one small nod that told me he'd seen this pattern before. This is thorough, he said. I work in fraud, I replied. Convenient. Not for her. He slid a stack of forms toward me. If you want the process to move quickly, we'll file immediately. No separation period needed with evidence like this. I signed where he pointed. It was surprisingly painless, like closing an account I'd forgotten I opened. When Sophie received the papers that evening, she reacted as if I'd served her an eviction notice from the Garden of Eden. "You can't be serious," she said, voice trembling through teeth that looked like they wanted to bite something. "You filed for divorce without giving me a chance to explain." "You had a chance," I said. "Several, actually. I made one mistake." "One mistake." I laughed softly. "Sophie, you created a travel itinerary for your mistakes. You gave them room service." She recoiled as if the truth had physical mass. "I can fix this," she insisted. "No," I said, "you can explain it to HR, to the IRS, to anyone who asks. But you can't fix it." She stared at me, chest rising and falling too fast. "This isn't how marriage works," she whispered. "We had a shared health plan," I said. "Turns out you used it more for hotel rooms than healthcare." Her face crumpled for a moment. I saw the woman I married. The one who thought competence could outrun consequences, but that version disappeared the instant her phone buzzed. Another notification from urgent care. Another reminder she had walked into something without checking the water first. After my question, "Do you know what health issue Marcus has?" she'd spent the entire afternoon in a panic calling clinics, begging for appointments, insisting they test for everything. Now, she was in the beginning of a long, slow medical calendar. Blood draw, baseline panel, follow-up panel, 8-week retest, for MON screening. Everything was inconclusive. Nothing said yes, but nothing said no either. The kind of results that don't give you answers, just more waiting. Sophie had never been good at waiting. She wanted fast answers, clean solutions, and easy narratives she could spin into something flattering. Medical ambiguity was a mirror she couldn't edit. Every few days, another clinic bill came through our shared plan. Every few days, I watched her walk in with a new bandage on her arm, her patience thinning as her fear grew. She tried to hide the trembling in her hands, but I saw it. I also saw the calls, dozens of them, to Marcus, all unanswered. It's a special kind of humiliation when your affair partner abandons you faster than the medical portal updates. One evening, she stood in the doorway of the living room holding a stack of lab instructions like they were court summons. "This isn't fair," she said, voice small. "None of this is fair." I agreed. "But fair doesn't mean what you think it means." She glared at me. "I told you I was sorry. You were sorry about getting caught. I said you weren't sorry about what you did." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, searching for the right combination of words to unlock sympathy. Nothing came. She had used all her lines already. Instead, she tried something new. Social reinforcements. By the next morning, our mutual friends were calling me, each with the controlled politeness of someone who'd been fed a version of events missing half the ingredients. "Derek," one friend started. "Sophie says she lied to HR." I said she lied to the IRS. She lied to her own sister. Why would you think she'd start telling the truth now? There was a long silence. "Do you have proof?" the friend asked finally. "I have a binder." She came by that afternoon. She left 30 minutes later with a completely different opinion of Sophie. That was the pattern. One by one, people who had tried to defend her realized the receipts didn't lie. Sophie didn't speak to me that night or the next one. The only sounds in the house were the soft buzzes of her clinic notifications and the muffled sobs. She tried to hide in the bathroom, not because she missed me, not because she felt remorse, but because consequences had finally stopped whispering and started knocking. A week after filing, I was in the garage tightening a bolt on the Mustang, when she appeared in the doorway. "Derek," she said, voice raw, "what do you want me to do?" I looked at her. Really? Looked. A woman unraveling under the weight of problems she created with absolute confidence. "Tell the truth," I said. For once, her eyes filled with what? Couldn't tell. Guilt? Fear? Self-pity? Probably self-pity. It was her most accessible emotion. She turned away, shoulders shaking, and walked back inside. I tightened the bolt gently, methodically, because machines, unlike people, behave exactly as expected. By the time the divorce petition went through first review, Sophie was already drowning in paperwork, investigations, and medical ambiguity. And for the first time in 13 years, the house felt quiet in a way that didn't require effort. Some things fall apart loudly, Others fall apart the moment sunlight hits them. Sophie's life had begun to do both. I just stood back and watched the inevitable collapse. Consequences didn't need my help. They were doing just fine on their own. Chapter 9. The IRS doesn't do sympathy. The first IRS letter arrived in a beige envelope, the kind that looks unassuming until you notice the government seal, which has all the warmth of a shark's grin. Sophie found it in the mailbox and brought it inside like it was radioactive. She dropped it on the kitchen counter. "What is this? You opened it?" I said, sipping coffee. "You tell me." Her voice cracked. "They're auditing me." She said me as if the universe had singled her out of a crowd for being too beautiful and hardworking. I scanned the page. The language was polite enough, but the message was direct. The federal government would like to know why you bought a luxury spa weekend with pre-tax medical funds. I slid the letter back toward her. "Congratulations," I said. "You got their attention." Her eyes filled with tears. The frustrated kind, not the guilty kind. "What am I supposed to do?" She whispered. "Well," I said, "in my experience, the IRS works slowly unless you commit tax fraud. Then they sprint like caffeinated cheetahs." She glared at me like I'd personally invited the IRS over for dinner. The truth was, once the health account administrator flagged the misuse, over $3,480 for hotels, seafood towers, and couples massages. The IRS didn't have a choice. They were legally required to poke their nose in. Sophie had committed fraud in full daylight. Marcus had too. Tax authorities love cases like this. Neat, documented, and stupid. By the end of the week, Sophie received her second letter, then her third. Each one thicker than the last, like Russian nesting dolls filled with consequences. When Marcus got his notifications, I didn't see them firsthand, but Julia texted me a screenshot with a single message. "Thought you might enjoy this." It was a government notice demanding Marcus respond to discrepancies in his medical spending. The timestamp was 7:23 a.m. He didn't even get breakfast before the consequences arrived. By month's end, both of them were deep in federal quicksand. Were anyone wondering? Yes, the penalties were real. IRS fines stack fast when you mix misuse, back taxes, accuracy penalties, and 2 years of interest. Fraud doesn't just add up, it compounds. Over $43,500 each in fines, penalties, and back taxes. I didn't gloat, not outwardly, but there was something eerily satisfying about watching bureaucracy do what human decency couldn't. Meanwhile, the Health Account Administration filed a civil suit against both of them for $16,300 in restitution. Sophie tried to argue that the hotel stay improved her mental clarity, and therefore counted as medical. The investigator simply blinked and said, "Ma'am, a beachfront suite with champagne service does not qualify as mental health care." She cried. He didn't blink. Some systems are merciless in a way people are not. The fallout spread like ash. Sophie's professional license, her precious credential that she polished more carefully than our marriage, was suspended pending review. Her boss called her personally. "We don't know when or if reinstatement is possible," he said. I heard her response through the wall, a mix of rage and desperation. Marcus didn't fare any better. He lost his analyst credentials. Hartwell terminated him so cleanly, it was like he never existed. Whatever corporate potential he thought he radiated, HR swept up with the rest of the debris. And then, in a twist worthy of a bad soap opera, Julia reopened her divorce settlement. Apparently, discovering your ex-husband has been committing federal fraud is a legal green light to renegotiate terms. She took him for another $65,000. "You have impeccable timing," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "I didn't plan the IRS," I said. "You didn't need to," she replied. "You just let Marcus be Marcus." I almost felt bad for the man. Almost. But then I remembered he told Sophie to handle it herself when she panicked about his health disclosure problem. Consequences like gravity didn't play favorites. The family drama arrived next right on schedule. Sophie's mother called me, voice quivering with manufactured outrage. How could you let this happen to her? Let repeated. She filed the fraudulent claims. You should have protected her from herself. I asked. She paused, offended by the implication that Sophie could possibly be responsible for her own actions. I always knew you weren't ambitious enough for her. She snapped. I almost thanked her. Validation is validation, even when it comes from a woman who once told me my job was cute. Sophie's sister texted me later. Please tell me you didn't actually report her. I didn't, I replied. I submitted documentation when someone asked for it. Oh, she blocked me. Tragedy. Inside the house, Sophie was deteriorating. Slowly, methodically, her clinic visits piled up, each one revealing nothing, resolving nothing. She sat at the table some nights, staring at her phone like a condemned prisoner, waiting for a last-minute pardon. I can't sleep, she told me once. Every test is inconclusive. What if? For clarity, the doctors never suggested a diagnosis. This was pure panic on her part, not medical reality. The uncertainty came from her fear, not the tests themselves. That's between you and Marcus, I said. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You're cruel, she said. I'm punctual, I corrected. Cruelty arrived months before I did. Some nights she tried to bargain. Some nights she tried to rewrite history. Some nights she cried loudly enough to make the neighbors uncomfortable. But the one thing she never did was take responsibility. The IRS didn't care. The Health Account Administration didn't care. Her employer definitely didn't care. Watching Sophie realize this, truly realize it, was not satisfying. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't catharsis. It was simply quiet, like watching a storm move over someone else's house for the first time. By the time both her federal penalties and civil restitution were finalized, Sophie had lost almost everything she once bragged about. Her job, her license, her financial security, her reputation, her ability to lie convincingly. And Marcus, her partner in luxury fraud, was drowning in the same sinking boat. Except he now owed Julia more than he'd ever saved. The government didn't take pity on either of them. They didn't need to. Sympathy costs time and money, but consequences. Consequences pay for themselves. Chapter 10. The divorce that looked like a crime scene. The divorce took 3 years. 3 slow, grinding, paperwork years. Long enough for 3 election cycles, for therapist offices to change locations, and for Sophie to reinvent her story so many times she eventually forgot the original script. Meanwhile, I learned something profound. A marriage doesn't end once, it ends in layers. Like peeling back wallpaper until you reach concrete. The courtroom for the final hearing was small and over-air-conditioned. The kind of place where pins go to die and judges go to stare down humanity's worst decision-making. Sophie sat on the opposite bench, hair flat, posture deflated. Her attorney whispering to her like a man trying to soothe a collapsing tent. My attorney sat beside me, flipping through our binder, tabs, receipts, notes, like he was reviewing an old cookbook. He'd seen it all before. People think their disasters are unique. Lawyers know better. When the judge entered, she glanced at the stack of documentation in front of her. Our stack, and then at Sophie's lawyer's thin folder, and a small tired expression crossed her face. Not pity, recognition. The look of a woman who knew exactly what she was about to sign and why. She read through the findings, her voice steady and professional, given the financial misconduct, given the misuse of tax-advantaged accounts, given the suspension of her professional license, given that Derek Morrison had maintained all household expenses alone for nearly 3 years. The judge didn't just sign the decree. She practically stamped it with "Good luck, sir." I kept the house, the mortgage, my retirement, my dignity, which notably had required no legal filing. Sophie received none of the things she'd once hinted she might be entitled to. No alimony, no property, not even the dining set she claimed was symbolic of our early marriage. The judge denied that request so fast I thought the air might ignite. Let's keep symbolism out of the legal record, she said. When it was over, Sophie stared at me across the courtroom. Not with hatred, not with remorse, with something much quieter. Recognition that the life she'd gambled with didn't belong to her anymore. Her attorney touched her arm. She didn't move. We all left through separate doors, like a house fire finally starved of oxygen. I drove home alone that afternoon. The house looked the same, but quieter, like it had taken a breath for the first time in years. Divorce doesn't clean a space, but it unclutters it. My mother called when she heard the news. So she said, It's finally done. It is. She let out a small hum of satisfaction. When someone shows you who they are, stop asking for a second opinion. I know, I said. You always did take too long with Decision M. That's debatable. It isn't, she said and hung up. Sophie moved to Seattle 3 months after the decree finalized. I heard she was staying with her sister, working part-time at a small company that didn't require a professional license. She told mutual acquaintances she wanted a fresh start somewhere creative. People don't usually move 2800M away to be creative. They move 2800M to outrun their history, but history travels light. She tried contacting me once. An email sent at 2:47 a.m. The subject line was blank. The body contained 6 paragraphs and no punctuation. I didn't read past the first sentence. I'm still not sure what I did to deserve this level of abandonment. I closed it, deleted it, emptied the trash folder just to be safe. Consequences had already answered for me. And Marcus, he landed exactly where a man like him should. A tiny apartment in Denver with peeling paint and a window facing a brick wall. Working an entry-level operations job at a startup where meetings have names like Synergy Storm and Monday Mojo. Julia updated me occasionally, always with a tone of clinical detachment, like she was reporting the migration patterns of an extinct bird. He makes a third of what he used to, she said once over coffee. He blames everyone except himself. Fitting, I replied. She lifted her cup to men who think charm is a retirement plan. I lifted mine, and to women who stopped accepting their nonsense, we clinked mugs softly. 2 survivors comparing notes. As for me, life didn't suddenly become joyful. It became calm. Peace isn't fireworks. Peace is the absence of alarms. I worked, slept, cooked actual meals, stopped waiting for shoes to drop that never should have been hanging over my head in the first place. In the evenings, I'd sit in the garage with the Mustang, tightening bolts and restoring the engine. Machines made sense. Every action produced a predictable reaction. No deception, no chaos, no pretending. Some days I wondered how long it would take for the last traces of my marriage to fade. Other days I didn't think about it at all. That I realized was progress. Real healing isn't loud. It doesn't perform. It doesn't demand applause. It just shows up one morning in the space where dread used to live. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt like a home again. Quiet, steady, mine. Chapter 11. The Return of the Empty Suitcase. 18 months passed. Quiet, steady, uneventful. Long enough for the dust to settle and for consequences to finish rearranging her life. A quiet one. Calm, orderly, almost disappointingly uneventful. The kind of year that feels like washing sod off a wall and discovering the original paint underneath was perfectly fine all along. Then one afternoon, while I was under the Mustang adjusting a stubborn bolt, someone knocked on the side garage door. The knock was tentative, timid, almost polite, the kind of knock people use when they're hoping the person inside won't answer. I recognized it immediately. Sophie. I didn't rush. I tightened the bolt, wiped my hands, counted to 3, and opened the door. She stood there holding a suitcase so light it looked empty. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair pulled back, her face stripped clean of the corporate gloss she once weaponized like armor. She walked in like a stray cat who remembered where the free food used to be. "Hey," she said, voice small. I leaned against the door frame. "Sophie." She looked around the garage as if expecting it to greet her, as if the oil stains and tool racks might say, "Welcome back, old friend." They gave me my final test results, she said. "All clean, everything." The doctor said, "I'm fine." It was all paranoia. "Congratulations," I said. "Want a trophy?" She flinched but kept going. "I thought maybe we could talk." "We don't talk," I said. "We litigate or we nod politely at mutual acquaintances. That's the extent." She inhaled sharply the way someone does before diving into cold water. "I made mistakes," she said. "I know that now." "You knew it then." "No," she insisted. "I didn't understand the consequences." "Not really." I almost laughed. People always understand consequences, just not early enough to avoid them. She took a step closer. "I've changed." "No," I said. "You've lost things." That's not the same. Her eyes glistened. Theatrical? Maybe. Habitual? Definitely. After everything we've been through, she began. Exactly. I cut in. After everything, why would you think this door still opens? She blinked, stunned into silence. She set the suitcase down between us. A sad symbolic offering. My sister said I've overstayed my welcome, she murmured. She told me I need to figure out my life. Somewhere else. I don't have anywhere else to go, Derek. There it was. The truth finally. Not romantic. Not apologetic, practical. I said, now we're getting somewhere. She swallowed hard. I'm serious. I know. I can't afford rent. I can't find full-time work. My sister says I've overstayed my welcome. Marcus won't return my calls. I don't have friends left. Who? Believe whatever version you told them. I asked. Shocking. Her voice cracked. I need help. No, I said. You need stability. You need structure. You need a home with utilities paid on time. You need someone who doesn't mind carrying the weight while you reorganize your life. I need you. You need anyone. I corrected. I'm just the last person on your list. If your sister hadn't kicked you out, if Marcus hadn't vanished, if your license hadn't been suspended, you wouldn't be standing here. That's not true. I raised an eyebrow. If I were still in that studio apartment working night shifts, would you be here? She hesitated. Silence answered for her. I stepped back inside the garage and crossed my arms. You're here, I said, because I have the house, the salary, the structure, the peace you can't generate on your own. You don't want me. You want a soft place to land. I loved you, she whispered. Past tense noted. No, she said urgently. I still do. No, I replied. You love what I represent right now. She stared at the floor, shoulders trembling. You're really going to leave me with nothing? I didn't take anything, I said. You burned it all down and now want to sleep in the ashes. Her voice rose, shaky, desperate. I'm trying to apologize. You're trying to move back in, I said calmly. There's a difference. Just a few weeks, she pleaded until I get on my feet. No, you can't be this cold. I'm not cold, I said. I'm done. Her eyes hardened. You'd let me be homeless. You're not my responsibility anymore. I said, you ended that when you committed tax fraud on our joint account. She grabbed my arm. Derek, please. I can't do this alone. I pulled my arm free. You did everything alone. That's the problem. She started crying loud. Messy, theatrical tears that drew sympathy from strangers and irritation from me. What do you want from me? She sobbed. Tell me what I need to do. Nothing, I said quietly. There's nothing left to fix. You hate me. No, I said truthfully. I just don't care anymore. That broke her more than anger ever could. She stepped forward as I stepped back. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. I didn't do anything, I said. I just stopped stepping in front of the consequences you created. She stared at me, shaking, mascara streaking down her cheeks. You're the worst person I've ever met, she snapped. And yet, I said, you came to me first. She froze. I walked toward the door. Goodbye, Sophie. She lunged forward. Wait. I closed the door, locked it, listened as her knocking changed from frantic to pleading to silence. When I finally opened the door again, 20 minutes later, she was gone. The suitcase, too. I returned to the Mustang, turned up the radio, went back to tightening the bolts. Life was quieter that way, predictable, steady. Some people return wanting forgiveness. Others return wanting shelter. Sophie returned wanting the life she abandoned. And I had no interest in renting it back to her. Chapter 12. Peace at last is non-refundable. Sophie didn't leave right away. For several minutes after I closed the door, she pounded on it. First with anger, then desperation, then something softer that sounded almost like hope gasping for a pulse. I didn't answer, not because it was dramatic, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't be a rerun of the last few years. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Eventually, the driveway went quiet. Eventually, the house settled again like a shaken snow globe whose flakes had finally drifted to the bottom. I watched through the garage window as she dragged her suitcase down the walkway, still empty, still symbolic. She paused once, looked back at the house as if expecting it to reconsider, then disappeared around the corner. I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, waiting for some surge of emotion. Regret, guilt, nostalgia, anything. Nothing came. I went back to the Mustang. Machines were honest. They behaved exactly according to the forces applied to them. No gaslighting, no omissions, no creative retellings of history. If a bolt was loose, you tightened it. If something snapped, you replaced it. Simple cause, simple effect. I spent the rest of the afternoon adjusting the timing belt while the radio hummed in the background. Sunlight stretched across the concrete floor. The house felt still but not hollow. Quiet but not lonely. Empty but in the way. An open field is empty, ready for whatever comes next. Peace is cheaper than marriage counseling and far more effective. Sophie didn't return. She didn't call. She didn't email. Maybe she finally understood. Or maybe she simply ran out of energy to perform sorrow for an audience that had stopped buying tickets. I found both explanations equally satisfying. A few weeks later, my sister came over for dinner. She'd always had a talent for slicing through delicate subjects with the precision of a tax auditor. So she said, pouring wine, "Do you miss her?" I took a moment not to think, but to make sure the answer came out clean. "I missed the version of her that didn't exist," I said. My sister set the wine down slowly. "Well, that's bleak. It's honest." She nodded. Honesty is cheaper than therapy, too. We clinked glasses. Life after Sophie wasn't triumphant or cinematic. It was quiet, predictably quiet. I went to work. I came home. I cooked meals that involved actual vegetables. Weekends were spent restoring the Mustang, taking long drives, reading books I never had time for because I'd been too busy managing someone else's crisis. The strange thing about peace is how unremarkable it feels. You don't celebrate it. You don't frame it. You simply notice the absence of dread. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch with a beer, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The same house that once felt suffocating now felt spacious. Maybe it had always been spacious. Maybe I just needed the noise removed. Her ghost wasn't here. Not the romantic kind. Sophie wasn't sentimental enough for that. But the logistical kind. The kind that leaves drawers empty and silence in its place. I didn't mind. Peace doesn't need furniture. Every now and then, mutual acquaintances updated me on Sophie's attempts to rebuild herself in Seattle. Part-time job, roommates, new therapist, new story about our marriage, tailored for whichever listener she wanted sympathy from. I never corrected any of it. The truth didn't need help. It had a perfect track record of arriving uninvited. Marcus, from what Julia told me, was still stumbling through life with the confidence of a man who believed charisma could substitute for accountability. He was learning slowly and painfully that charm has an expiration date. Everyone, it seemed, was busy living consequences of their own design. And me, I was restoring a car from the ground up, sleeping through the night, breathing air that didn't carry tension. Peace didn't come in a single moment. It arrived gradually, quietly, like a house plant growing in a corner you stopped paying attention to. One evening after finishing the engine adjustment, I stepped back and looked at the Mustang. Steady, solid, dependable. Exactly the opposite of the life I dismantled to get here. I wiped the grease from my hands, turned off the garage light, and walked inside my house. A house that finally felt like mine and not a stage for someone else's performances. Peace, I learned, wasn't something you fought for. It was what remained after you stopped fighting. And the best part, peace is non-refundable. Epilogue. The case file that looked awfully familiar. A year after Sophie dragged her empty suitcase off my property, life settled into something suspiciously close to normal. Or maybe it wasn't normal. Maybe it was just mine. Finally, unshared and unchaotic. Work promoted me again. Senior investigator with an office window that overlooked the parking lot. Glamorous, I know. But after the last few years, I take a view of asphalt over melodrama any day. One Wednesday morning, a new hire named Kumar knocked on my door. Young guy, eager eyes, posture too straight for someone who planned on staying in fraud investigation long-term. Mr. Morrison, I was told you'd walk me through my first major case. Sure, I said. What do you have? He handed me a folder thick enough to double as a seat cushion. I opened it, skimmed the first page, stopped, stared. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, a dark one, right up my alley. Kumar cleared his throat. It's a misuse of benefits case. Looks messy. Messy wasn't the word. It was a déjà vu wearing a fake mustache. A claimant who requested medical leave, never had the surgery, then charged thousands of dollars in hotel stays, spa treatments, luxury meals, and my personal favorite, custom jewelry to a tax-advantaged medical account. It was like someone plagiarized my marriage. Sir, Kumar asked. Something wrong? No, I said not wrong, just familiar. We walked through the details. He took notes like a court stenographer. Halfway down the summary, he hesitated. Looks like she's claiming the spa was therapeutic. I nodded. I've heard that argument. Doesn't fly unless the spa also diagnoses you with something. He blinked. People really do this. People, I said, believe creative accounting is a personality trait. He smiled awkwardly, waiting for the punchline. I didn't give him one. We continued. He asked questions. I answered them. He studied the file like a student preparing for finals. But I wasn't studying the file. I was studying him. The way he flinched at each new layer of stupidity. He reminded me of myself years ago before I learned that fraud isn't a field of work. It's a recurring motif in the human condition. Near the end, he said, "Do you think this person knows this is illegal?" "Oh," I said, closing the folder. "They absolutely know. They just didn't think the rules would apply to them." Kumar frowned. "That's bold. That's adulthood," I said. He nodded slowly. "So, what happens next?" "We follow procedure," I said. "We gather documentation. We write the report. We let the consequences do their thing. And the claimant, they eventually realize," I said, leaning back, "that the universe keeps receipts even when they don't." Kumar left my office with the folder tucked under his arm like a lead weight. I watched him go, then turned back to the window. A quiet morning, fresh asphalt, no storms on the horizon. Funny thing about peace, it doesn't announce itself. It just sits with you like an old friend who never needed introductions. I picked up my coffee, now lukewarm, and took a long sip. Some people rebuild marriages. Some rebuild reputations. Some rebuild lives. I rebuilt a Mustang. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like anything was missing. Peace wasn't dramatic or romantic or cinematic. But it was mine. And unlike tax fraud, peace is non-refundable, and that's how it all ended. Derek asked one simple question, and Sophie's entire world collapsed. So here's the question. If your ex came back after losing everything, would you give them a second chance? Or is peace non-refundable? Drop your answer in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.